This episode of Around the Layout is powered by Rapido Trains.
Buying Rapido trains will make you happy.
Rapido's going back to the 90s for the return of the Mac. SD70 Macs in both HO and N scale in variations you've never seen before. Whether it's coal or racks, you need a 70 Mac. Check out all of the details at rapidotrains.com. Family owned for 25 years, Spring Creek is your destination for model trains. Check out springcreekmodeltrains.com for a wide variety of offerings from today's top manufacturers and exclusive products found nowhere else. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, or at a train show near you, stop in and say wow. To see where they'll be next, visit their website at springcreekmodeltrains.com. When I was trusted with the work of North America's top modelers, I entrusted Model Train Box. Flying halfway around the world to Australia, I needed absolute confidence that those models would arrive safe, and they did. Model Train Box proved that it's secure, durable, and built for modelers who care about every detail. Learn more or order yours today at modeltrainbox.com and transport your models with confidence. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott, so glad you could join us. In a hobby where bigger often seems better, what happens when you intentionally go smaller? That's what we're going to find out, and our guest to help me go through that is Scott Thornton. Scott, welcome back.
Thanks, Ray. Good to be here.
Glad to have you back on the show. I was looking at some dates that you were on. Episode 17, October 11th, 2022. We got introduced to your Milan branch, and then August 27th, 2024, episode 117. We talked about the theatrical approach to model railroading. Plus, you've been on here every time St. Louis comes around lately, so we get to talk about that. But tonight, a topic and a new chapter in the model railroading of Scott Thornton, and we'll dive into that and learn what you've been up to.
That sounds great. Yeah, things are changing in my world, so I've got something to talk about.
Well, awesome. We'll dive right into it. The last time we left off, it was the Iowa Interstate Milan branch on your mind. You had been writing some articles for RMC on it and working on building that layout. What changed?
Well, I'm a newbie to a different scale, but I'm happy to be moving up in the world. And by that, I mean, I'm switching from HO to O scale. And I'm also switching from focusing on a prototype approach to a proto-freelance approach. So it's a big change for me, and I'm pretty happy about it. It took me a while to finally, make the decision and pull the plug on something that I'd been working on for close to 10 years. But once I finally did make that big decision, it I don't know, it just made me feel pretty good. And I am one of those type of modelers that works at a snail's pace. And I've been trying my best over the last couple of years to increase my modeling pace. I have some friends who seem to get a ton done, and they do it really well. And I've got to quit the analysis by paralysis and just overthinking things and over detailing things, and focus more on holistic scene composition and get it done. For me, the hobby can turn into overthinking, overdoing things, focusing too much on the minutia, and thus not getting enough built. So that's one thing I've been working on. But as far as the Milan branch and why I decided to switch scales and switch emphasis, I became somewhat disenchanted with prototype modeling in that it forces one to focus on a specific aspect of a railroad for quite a long time. And for me, I'm very interested in all kinds of different aspects of railroading and modeling. And I just started to lose interest in focusing just on a small branch line of a regional railroad. So that's really the essence of it. I wanted to do something where rather than building up, I wanted to build down, simplify, and start in a different scale that where to me it shows more of the mass of railroading. And certainly when you go up in a scale in terms of size, you get more of that, what I call trackside effect. You feel the mass of the trains better. The sound, which is really important to me in the hobby, the sound is so much better as well. Even though in our day and age, we've got great sound reproduction in HO scale, you move up to a scale like O and it just ramps up to another level. So I guess that's the essence of it. I wanted to be able to model more than just a specific prototype part of a railroad, and I wanted to be able to complete the railroad in a quicker fashion. And then once I get the new, smaller, if you will, layout in O close to completion, I still plan on going back to HO eventually and doing some small modules to take to shows, RPMs, things like that. So,
well, these are some pretty big changes, pun kind of intended with it going from HO to O scale. But really, you talked about this analysis paralysis thing that happened to you in HO. And I know for quite a few people, they hit that analysis paralysis in a layout. They're not happy, but they struggle to move on. Did you find that at all part of your process, a little bit of a struggle? You've been working on this for 10 years and you know your why a little bit. You know that you want to move on. You know that you want to accomplish something different, but 10 years has got to be a hard thing to walk away from, isn't it?
Well, it was, in the sense that, some of the models that I had completed, and as far as scenes, I didn't really complete any of the scenes other than my Rock River scene to completion. Well, that was another frustration, but I did complete some of the main structures and other details, and they all became my babies. You don't want to give them up. And so I kept struggling with, well, should I keep plugging away with something that I'm starting to lose interest in? So that was the difficulty. For a number of months, I just debated in my mind what I should do, whether to keep going and completing it so that I had a finished layout that I could invite friends over and operate on, or make a shift toward a direction that had always, well, not always, but had been brewing in the back of my mind for at least a couple years. So just one day I finally decided, nope, this is a change I need to make. In fact, I was working on one aspect of the layout that isn't my favorite, which was wiring. And I was installing some switch machines. I was going from manual turnout control to using, switch machines. And that really threw me over the edge. It's like, I don't want to keep doing this, So I finally said, okay, this is it. I've been thinking about this, so I'm just going to go for it. And I've heard stories, Ray, about other modelers who've wrestled with this as well. And from what I understand, a lot of modelers who make a switch, it seems like a huge percentage of them are very happy once they do make the switch. So it's not something that's odd or out of the ordinary. I think it happens quite a bit in our hobby. So anyway, I made that switch, and then I threw out to my closer group of friends, I threw out what I was up to. And I said, would any of you guys be interested in any of the models that I had on the HO layout? And to my pleasant surprise, a lot of them were very interested. And so I sold off a lot of what I had created. And, just took that money and started to put it toward some of the O scale stuff. And another thing about O scale, and this is just a little caveat, but sometimes people can think, oh, if you move up in scale, it's going to be more expensive. Actually, in O, certain things can be expensive, like when you get into detailed steam locomotives, but other things like just rolling stock and diesel locomotives, actually the prices are very comparable to HO, surprisingly. And so I didn't really have much of a problem selling off a lot of the components on the Milan branch and then turning right around and starting to invest in things for the O scale layout, which was a nice thing. It was fun.
Also, that selling part probably is a great way to commit to flight, doesn't it? Like you're once that stuff is gone, it's in boxes, it's being shipped out or being handed off to other people. It's kind of, you got to go now. It's all going out the door. So you're committed to it.
Absolutely. And a lot of the models, needless to say, went to friends that I've known for years. So it's not like, quote, my babies are gone and never to be seen again. I'll see them on other layouts and whatever my friends are up to. So that was really rewarding and, fun to do. And I told everybody up front, and plus I gave them good deals. I wasn't going to, put any extravagant number on these models. I wanted to move them out and make room for the new stuff to go in its place. So in other words, everybody got a good deal. So that was nice.
As you start to learn about O scale and you've made this commitment now that you're going to it, talk about the transition to it, the things that you learned. What was some of the things that surprised you about O scale as you started off?
Well, one thing I've learned, and I've made quite a number of O scale friends already in that realm. And O scale is definitely more of a craftsman focused scale. It's not like HO where that's the king of the scales. And if you need something, you pretty much can find it in HO. O scale is totally different. And so are some scales like S. If you want it, you either have to scratch build it, something unique, or you have to really search it out. And I quickly learned from some of my new friends in that scale that if something comes out from a manufacturer and you shouldn't take much time debating whether, it's something that you should purchase for your layout. If it's close to what will work on your layout, you just buy it because otherwise it's gone and then you regret it. And the scale also has a very robust buy and sell niche. So if you need to find something or you need to sell something, it's pretty easy to do. So that's an enjoyable aspect too, because guys are always hunting or selling, and so you can find things pretty easily.
You mentioned the craftsman side of O scale, and I know that you're a very creative person and you like the artistic and the creative side. And I'm sure that was, a main appeal for you with O scale. Were there some things that you were worried about when you moved over to O scale though?
No, not really, because my interests have been changing in the hobby where, the Milan branch was a small branch line of a regional railroad. So I already like small oriented ops. And as time goes on, I just become more and more interested in still small operations, but even at the micro level. And for my available space in my layout room, where the HO layout once was, and now moving to O, in effect, since O is basically twice the size of HO, I've cut my layout space in half. So what I'm going to be building, in effect, is the equivalent in HO of a micro layout, but just in O. But to me, that's real appealing. I've become very interested in small footprint layouts. And it just fits right into my wheelhouse where I want to focus on smaller number of projects, hyper detail, and very simple minimal ops. So it's a win-win for me, going up in scale, going down in the available space, but still being creative in that I can get my craftsman fix and detail fix and sound fix and mass fix. And also I can focus on developing operations that are even more creative. For example, on the HO layout, I used what I called a writing conductor, where I had a little conductor figure, and I used neodymium magnets on the engines and rolling stock to connect the conductor. So he rides the cars, he rides the engine, he gets on the ground because the magnets were incorporated in the scenery. And when moving to O, I'm going to do the same thing, albeit I'll be able to see it better because the figures are bigger, but that aspect of the operations will still be there. So that'll help slow down the ops. And on my new plan, I'm not going to include a runaround. So I'm emulating what I see in the town I live in here, where I have a Union Pacific local that comes through, and they use two engines together almost exclusively because it's the UP mainline and they don't have runarounds. So when they come through town to switch, they use those two engines to move cars, jumping back and forth between the engines. And I always liked watching them operate that way. So with this new O micro, if you will, I'm going to do the same thing. I've got two 70-tonners that I'm going to use. And then when I get tired of those, I have a SW8, and I'm going to be building GP10. So the 8 and the 10 will work in tandem, and the two 70-tonners will work in tandem. So it'll provide some real interesting back and forth when I'm switching cars.
I want to go back a little bit from your mindset changing from prototype, and I think you were pretty strict on prototype with a Milan branch, to now this proto freelance approach. Tell us your why behind that.
Well, again, I see a lot of squirrels, squirrel, squirrel. I have so many different interests in terms of the railroad industry and the hobby. So how could I really scratch that itch of being interested in so many different things and not be restricted to one specific part of a prototype? See, that was what was really affecting me. And so when I made the decision, with prototype modeling, you basically have to stay dedicated to whatever stake you drive into the ground, And for me, I like to watch a lot of the military modelers, primarily for their scenery techniques, because I think they're just very uber skilled in how they paint and weather and do their scenery for their dioramas. But the thing I started to get envious of was they were much like a fine artist, where they would start a diorama, or you could think of it in terms of a painting, and they would develop that diorama to completion. And that diorama had a specific theme for what they were doing. Let's say they were modeling a bombed out World War II village with a tank moving through the rubble. And then once they completed that, they were done and they could move on to a different theme. But here I was, being a prototype modeler, stuck on a specific branch line with specific industries that I had to complete in order to get the holistic layout in final form. But it was taking too long, and I was starting to lose interest in that particular theme. So what's one to do? Well, I decided I needed to make a change. And so I thought, well, maybe I could try and mimic what a lot of these military guys are doing, where I build a smaller footprint layout and maybe complete it faster. And then once it's completed, I've got a completed, basically you could call it a diorama, or like I like to refer to them as dioramas, because we have the advantage of being model railroaders of our modeling isn't static. We actually have animation, movement, and sound, and all of those wonderful things. So I hope that answers your question. I wanted to have the ability to jump between themes, have a smaller footprint for the layout to complete it in a faster amount of time, and again, scratch all those itches, like move on, model different other things. Like I said, once I get the O scale quote home layout, and again, keep, just for the audience, just remember it's in my mind, it's O scale, but it's a micro layout. So it's hopefully won't take me that long to get it to some completed form. And then I plan on modeling other smaller scenes, other themes, if you will, in HO, and perhaps, even in O. So that's really what is getting my juices flowing, if you will.
In a lot of ways I can relate to this. And there's times when I'm thinking about my own personal desires or interests in railroading in general, and then in model railroading. And I get envious at times of guys like, I'll pick on Don Iris. Don is Providence and Worcester, and nothing really exists for Don other than the Providence and Worcester for him to model. In some ways, it may be easier because now he's just laser focused and he's completely content in that. But I, like it sounds you are so interested in so many variety of things, and to have an outlet for all of that interest, where maybe you have one main interest, but then you're able to diversify out. And it sounds like you're on that path. You're on a plan that's going to allow you to touch a multitude of different things.
That's it. You just said it. And like, I'll give you another example. Like, I love a lot of different railroads. And one that I've always been a fan of is the Milwaukee Road. I've got plenty of books on the Milwaukee Road. I like the Milwaukee Road paint scheme. I like how, they ran bare bones, their equipment looked run down, but they kept everything going. It was a railroad that had a lot of character and a lot of interest for me. And I got interested in my area of the country up in Northeast Iowa. There was at one point, the Milwaukee Road ran the line that was on the Iowa side along the Mississippi. And they had a branch line that sprung off that line that ran up and down along the shore at a junction called Waukon Junction. And then this is way up in the northeast part of the state. And then this branch ran from Waukon Junction northwest. And this coming out of the Mississippi Valley, it's very bluff oriented, tall limestone bluffs and stand tables, and very pretty country, very scenic. And it came up out of the valley and it snaked its way along this tributary called Paint Creek. And then about midway up the line, it went through this little village called Waterville. And then as it continued, it terminated at a larger town called Waukon, Iowa. And the Milwaukee ran that branch for quite a number of years before they abandoned the line in, I believe, 1970. And then in 1972, they came through and tore up all the rails and took out some of the bridges. But that line always held a special place in my heart because I knew the area. My wife was from there. So we would always take trips to see her folks. And of course, I would rail fan the ghosts of the old branch and, hunt down the old grades and the old steel bridges that are still in place. Some of them used by the farmers, to get their tractors across, et cetera. So when I started thinking about moving to O scale and proto freelancing, I thought that would be a perfect branch line to base my new larger scale micro layout on. So I developed the whole concept of what I'm calling the layout now. It's going to be called the Paint Creek in Waterville. And so I designed my own graphics for it and a new livery colors for the locomotives. And there's going to be one caboose on it that'll act like a shoving platform. And so that's another aspect, especially on the proto freelance side, where it's really fun to develop your own history. But I was basing it on the Milwaukee. And since I have an affinity toward the Milwaukee, I'm also incorporating aspects of the Milwaukee into the freelance Paint Creek and Waterville. For example, I'm using some of the same design spark arresters that the Milwaukee used, their lateral spark arresters that you saw in a lot of their diesels, especially their SW1s. And I'm also using their switch stand style. The Milwaukee had a very unique switch stand, so I'm using that on the layout. So this way, I get to be creative by incorporating elements of one of my favorite railroads into the proto freelance, which to me is terribly exciting and fun because it's almost like you're hearkening back to different aspects that you love. And here you get to incorporate them into your modeling and make it completely realistic and appropriate for your vision of what you're creating. And I know other modelers have done that to great effect. I mean, you can think of guys like Mike Conflone, like his is a proto freelance layout. It seems like it was a real railroad, but it's totally fictitious, but it's still based on a prototype region, and some of the elements that he's incorporated are exactly what I'm doing now. And, taking different design aspects and flavors from those prototype layout or prototype railroads and then putting them into the layout, which is just a blast.
I believe those are the elements that help deliver plausibility, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it does. But I just look at it as, hey, I'm scratching the itch where I get to take elements that I love, put them in, and it just adds to the flavor of what I'm creating. Go back to just being a fine artist. Okay, fine artists will compose a scene. In fact, I was just reading about one of my favorite fine artists of all time, Edward Hopper. And Hopper used to take scenes. He used to paint urban and rural landscapes, but with hardly any people in them. It was he conveyed a real sense of loneliness and isolation. But when he was composing his scenes, if you saw the actual scene, he made creative choices of, okay, I'm going to leave this element in and some elements I'm going to take out. And that's exactly what, for example, Mike Conflone was doing on his layout, and it's what I'm doing on mine too, where I get to incorporate certain things that I really like and leave out other aspects, but it's totally up to me. And to me, that's a terribly exciting and fun thing to do. I forgot to mention one other aspect of this line where I'm calling it the Paint Creek in Waterville is that region of Northeast Iowa is well known for their trout streams. So I have a slogan and a graphic that's going to go on the engines and caboose and other where the graphics are needed. The slogan will be the trout route. So I've been having fun not only designing that look, but like I built my own little pseudo neon sign that says the trout route that looks just like the graphic, and just fun things you can do in the hobby that are little side projects that make it that much more enjoyable.
I always thought if you were to build one layout, by the time you get done with whatever that one layout is, you're probably at your absolute best when it comes to modeling. And what do you do with all that talent now that your layout is complete? And I think this approach, which you're mentioning, your approach with the dioramas and whatnot, is seemingly part of a movement we've been hearing about. I mean, even going back to our interview with Kinzer Hurt, where he was talking about multiple small layouts versus one big one, and that he never even envisions building one big layout because he enjoys touching on so many things. And I think for your approach, I think you're really showing others that if you have that vast interest, or you want to continue building or using these skills that you're building up during a layout build, there is an avenue, there is an outlet for this.
Yeah. And that's why I think, there's been a lot of discussion in the hobby, as you know, Ray, of late, that the hobby may be going more in the direction of smaller layouts, even portable layouts like our British friends build. And then they take them to their shows over in England, and everybody gets to enjoy not only the wonderful modeling that they're creating on these small footprint modules, but they operate them. So you get to see the operations, right there. And to me, that is a real exciting aspect of the hobby. And I just wonder if that's a direction that we're tending to go. Now, I have nothing, of course, against larger layouts, and that's what we have here in North America predominantly, is medium-sized to large layouts, and they're wonderful. And frankly, I'm always amazed when I visit a modeler's layout that is larger and either completed or close to complete, and I'm like, how in the world did he get all this done? Good heavens, man, that's a lot of work and a lot of vision. Some of these guys have teams, other fellow friends that they trust, but some of them are lone wolves and they produce these things, and I'm always surprised by how well some of these guys do it. But for me, again, I have a lot of varied interest. I like to work slowly. So for me, it's definitely the small footprint. Smaller is better. And with O scale, smaller but bigger is better. I can see it now. I just turned 65 in March. And for those who've reached that magical Medicare age, you start to realize, hey, I can't see some of this stuff anymore. I need, put on my magnifiers in order to work on my models. And I think I'd rather have a slightly larger scale where I don't always have to pull out the magnifiers to work on the models.
Well, that'll definitely be a big improvement, being able to see what you're working on. Let's talk about your plan to work on this. So, we talked about the myelin branch. That's gone. Pieces are gone of that. What is your new approach in the O scale? What are some of the things that you did with the myelin branch that you'll be able to take those techniques and apply it? And then what will change?
Okay. Well, the audience will just have to use their best mind's eye, but I'll try and describe what I'm up to. With the myelin branch, I only had 42 linear feet. So it came out from the walls. It was a shelf layout, so it came out 2 feet, and then it was the 42 linear feet, point to point, with staging, just single track staging. So nothing fancy. So that's the space I have for this new O scale micro layout. And what I'm going to have on one end is still just a single track staging that I'll probably just fiddle cars on and off. So even when I'm making up a slightly longer train, I mean, a long train on this new layout will be 4 cars. Okay. So we're not talking a lot because O scale takes up a lot of space, but that small little single track staging will be where the trains make their appearance. And then on that end, I'm dividing the layout up into 3 sections. And what I'm trying to do is be creative in the transitions between each of those 3 sections. So coming out of staging, immediately the train will go across another railroad's line at grade, an interchange with the IC&E, the Iowa, Chicago, and Eastern. And there'll be a spur off the side that is truncated, so it gives you the impression that it goes further, but that's where I can spot 2 or 3 cars for the train to pick up or deliver. So there's an interchange section, and then, or that's what I'm calling that first section, the interchange. And then it'll go around a left-handed curve. It's the tightest radius on the layout. And then between that, through that curve will be some scenery, will be a scenery element of some limestone bluffs. So that's my transition to the next scene. So it'll in some ways, I'm going to try and model so that it kind of hides the fact that that curve is the tightest curve, because again, O scale takes up a lot of space and the curves have to be broad. So that's a 44-inch radius curve through there. So it'll go through this cut with the limestone bluffs, and that'll transition into the second scene, which is going to be what I'm calling my creek scene. And that's just going to be a single bridge that crosses the Paint Creek and then goes from the 44-inch curve into a 54-inch curve. And that'll be that scene. Okay. So if you follow me, and then transitioning from the creek scene to what I'm calling the industrial area will be one of those quintessential wooden county road overpasses, that we see so often. If you can see that in your mind's eye, just a simple little arched cross where the cars go over. That'll be the transition from the creek scene into the industrial scene. And then I spent quite a bit of time trying to determine what industries that I could model with limited space that would give me the most satisfaction. And I decided on 3, one being, and this kind of follows the Lance Mindheim approach for getting the most bang for your buck. One of them will be spur that is up against a transload. There'll be a transload dock, but also an open area. So there I can spot any type of car that can get unloaded by a forklift or a front end loader or a crane or something like that. Okay. The second industry is a salt dealer. And I'm modeling that on an actual salt dealer here in Ames, Iowa, where I live. It's just right downtown. It's just a simple Balin metal building. And then they had an under the track conveyor that comes out and feeds local surrounding communities, send dump trucks in to receive the salt so that they can bulk up for winter, for snow. So that's the second industry. And the reason why I chose that one is because it was simple, but also because I love beat up old, long out of date covered hoppers, rusty, nasty looking hoppers. So that's why I went for that industry. And that's going to be really fun to model those hoppers because they're true rust buckets. And then the last industry is going to be a corn syrup terminal. Again, that's one that Lance spent a lot of his articles on, talking about how you can have a lot of variety with an industry like that, because corn syrup cars are not only interesting, they're shorter, more, stub end tankers, but corn syrup comes in different grades. So, and those grades cannot be contaminated cross line. So you have to spot those cars at specific areas in your terminal where they are to be unloaded for just their particular grade. So that's going to be fun because I bought 9 different Atlas O 17,600 tankers for the corn syrup, and it's going to be a lot of fun weathering those up and then determining which ones are different grades. And again, remember, there's no runaround. So when the train comes into town, those 2 locomotives have to break off. Sometimes I'm going to run them, both engines on the front, and one has to break off, get on a siding while the train goes further up, and then they can switch back and forth. And sometimes I'm going to run into town with one on the front end and one on the back end. So it gives me more variety there and more operational fun with that. But those are the 3 industries, and those are the 3 sections.
We hear Eric Hansman tell us on the RPM report, let the prototype be your guide. And it sounds like you let the prototype be your guide. And, you're talking about these industries, the facility that you see locally with the transload, and then, of course, the corn syrup and following that. And it really does it by following a prototype or following a prototype. Do you find that too, that it actually kind of sets you free a little bit and allows you to not have to completely freelance it? You've got something to base it on.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what makes it a lot easier. Otherwise, I would be kind of lost. I'd have to be doing all this research. And then even then I might not know if it was accurate or not. I mean, not that it has to be dead on accurate, but you want to have it be, like you said earlier, plausible. So I want it to look right. And, like I've been doing a little research on corn syrup terminals, and they can be large, they can be medium, they can be small. I'm going to be modeling more of a smaller facility where it's just a couple small structures, some larger vertical tanks, and then just a series of pipes and hoses. And that's it. But that's all you need. And so that's going to be fun. In addition, with the salt dealer, in my research there, I mean, I have the prototype right in town here, so I'm basically following what I see. But in a lot of these scenarios, they'll have a car puller, and what a car puller is just a little motorized device that sits on the ground, and they use cables, and they'll hook the cable up to the back of, let's say, 2 cars, and then they'll pull it forward as they're emptying the cars. So you don't need a diesel engine or a tractor or anything like that to move the cars. The car puller does it. Well, I plan on having one of those built in eventually, where I'll have something on the fascia where you can just hook up the cable and then hit the button, and the car puller will pull the next car forward. So things like that, But you're right. I mean, you just follow the prototype and you're good to go. Or you can be a little creative as well.
Well, look at the amazing opportunities it gives you to be more creative, right? By looking at that prototype and seeing how they move cars, and now you'll be able to develop that for your layout. So a lot of neat things that come out of following the prototype. Let's talk about your track plan. What I'm imagining that are you reusing the bench work that you had for the Milan branch, or is this a complete rip down, tear down rebuild? How are you approaching your bench work and then eventually your track work?
Well, that's a really good question, Ray. I'm glad you asked it, because I've had to be creative in that realm too, because I hand laid all the track on the Milan branch. And so I'm trying to save the rail because I really enjoy hand laying, and I'm going to hand lay the O track, but I've been pulling up a gazillion spikes and to save the rail, and that's kind of driving me crazy. So but once I get that done, I'm not going to tear out the roadbed and some of the scenery elements. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build some new roadbed a little higher up. I'm going to have some risers. So to answer your question, I'm basically going to reuse what I have there, but I'm just going to approach it differently. I'm going to have risers that will hold the O-scale roadbed up as it snakes through the area. And then as far as the fascia, I'm gonna take some, since the HO fascia is already in place, I'm gonna take some wood, in effect, some wood furring strips, glue them and screw them to the existing fascia, and then apply a new fascia, further out that I can bend into to follow the curves of the new O-scale track, and then cut out the to represent the varying landforms. So I'm basically going to build it on top of what is already there and make it easy on myself rather than tear everything out and make a big mess and then have to rebuild bench work and all that. I'm just going to redo it as simple as I can, efficiently.
Now talk about laying that track, and you're going to do the O scale by hand. I mean, it must be a little easier than HO, but quite a challenge nonetheless.
Actually, once you learn how to hand lay track, it becomes I'm sure a lot of modelers have heard this from others before, that hand lay, it becomes very relaxing. And I'm the same way. I really enjoy it. Plus it's absolutely the cheapest way to develop your track. Yes, it takes more effort, takes more time, but it's very enjoyable. And once you've done enough turnouts and in effect conquered the techniques, it's just, in my opinion, it's the way to go, because you can tweak the geometry until your cars and locomotives run through all the track like butter, which is really nice. So, and plus I'm debating whether I want to go and install tie plates and spikes in every tie. Since it is a small footprint layout, I probably will, but I may not. I don't know. I haven't decided.
Now talk about what the track configuration is going to be. I see you got this term here, inglenook. Tell us what an inglenook is.
An inglenook, and maybe some of the more savvy modelers out there might correct me, but my understanding of an inglenook, it's a British term for a track configuration that is composed of two turnouts that create three tracks that stub end. So, and there's a prototype for everything, and there's prototype inglenooks out there, but that's basically what it is. It's a uber simple track configuration that provides a lot of operating possibilities, just shuffling cars back and forth between the three tracks. What I'm doing is I'm creating that approach, an inglenook, but I'm also adding one or two more turnouts that come off the far side track of the inglenook and switch back into the corn syrup facility, which has another turnout for two tracks. So that's my configuration, which I think will work really well for, again, using the two engine approach.
Well, I know one of the things that you love to do is the creative side of things between 3D printing and graphic design. You talked about the scheme and the logo for the railroad and developing a motto. Talk about how you're going to be able to incorporate the craftsman side of Scott Thornton into this new O-scale build.
Oh boy, Ray, that's another exciting element that I'm really jazzed about and have been for some time, because for a number of years now, I've been feeding an addiction to 3D printing, both with resin printer and FDM or filament printer. But in the last couple of years, I've gotten into using a diode laser for 2D elements that I need to create. And recently, within the last year, I've become hopelessly addicted to a more intuitive CAD program called Plasticity. And Plasticity has really opened up a whole new world for me in terms of the craftsman effect and developing my skills along those lines, because it's the other CAD programs out there are designed by engineers, and they're not very intuitive. And I'm absolutely a right brainer. My left brain shuts down. So I needed something that I could understand, that had a learning curve, but not a steep learning curve. And when I ran across Plasticity, that kind of fit the bill. And I've learned the program to the point now where when I model on my computer with Plasticity, it actually feels like I'm modeling at the bench rather than on a computer. And so that's just a terribly exciting aspect for me, because I want to be able to be creative in terms of developing different designs that I want to incorporate into the layout, go to the computer, design them, then either take them to any one of my 3 devices, whether I need a high resolution resin print model or something more lower res with the FDM, or sometimes I use the FDM for creating different templates and jigs for things that I need to create, which is fun. And then also with the laser, and the laser provides me the ability to, for example, cut elevations for building sides quickly and efficiently. I can draw them up on my drawing program, and boom, I've got the elevation. I can cut out the walls, the windows, the doors. And then I can also do texturing for any sort of brickwork or cinder block or what have you. And just the combination of those different tools, as well as just using traditional methods at the bench, again gives me that variety that I'm craving and I want. And it's so much fun to be able to develop your own models without having to rely predominantly with, where do I go out in the world and find it? I mean, I still support a lot of the cottage industry vendors for things I need, because I want to have a balance there too. But being a craftsman and focusing on that is an exciting aspect of the hobby for me.
Well, it sounds like we kind of come full circle about finding your why. And it sounds to me like the why of you, things that you're passionate about, and then matching it to your model railroading, finding a way to use all the creativity you really enjoy, the 3D printing and the graphic design, etc., into the layout and matching both of them together well so that you get the entire package. And it sounds like that's where you're heading with this whole project.
Yeah, exactly. And I would just add, when it comes to actually building the layout and thinking again creatively on scene composition and what elements go where, considering that everything is smaller, and I have to try and develop approaches that make the layout seem more expansive when it really isn't. I mean, that's a whole new challenge as well. So that's what really gets my juices flowing, Ray, is trying to be creative. And like we talked about in what you mentioned early on in one of the former episodes, where we talked about the theatrical approach, all of this, everything to me about model railroading relates to art. To me, model railroading is art. And yes, we have operations, and that's another uber fun, super fun aspect of the hobby. But the visual end, the artistic end, it's all art to me.
For the person listening to this episode who isn't feeling it with their current layout build, What is your advice to them?
Don't be afraid to make a change. And there's been many, many modelers who said that over the years, but I'm just getting in line and flowing with the crowd too. You know, I became, I hate keep using the word disenchanted, but I wasn't happy with the direction I was going with the branch line, the prototype branch line. And I was being drawn to a different aspect of the hobby. And there's many modelers out there who are very passionate about their particular niche in the hobby. And that's all good because the variety is good and more power to them. But if you are struggling and you don't feel confident in what you're doing, like I was in that position, just start to think about what really keeps your interest. It's better to do that than to walk away from the hobby. And in my opinion, and because the hobby has so much to offer in terms of variety and creativity and interest, there's just so much. And so don't be afraid to get creative, think creatively, and then finally pull a plug and go in a different direction, because I think you'll end up enjoying it.
Scott, where can folks follow along as you create the O-scale version of the Paint Creek in Waterville?
Yeah, people can go to a friend of mine's blog, a friend named Sean Brandstetter. He has a blog called shortlinemodelers.com, and he graciously offered to let me post on there, and that's what I'm doing. I've just started to post about what I'm doing with the layout, and if you're interested, just go to shortlinemodelers.com and you can see what I'm doing as well as what Sean has done in the past. And there's another modeler, and forgive me, his name's Ben, I think, and Ben's on there, and he's got some interesting things as well.
Awesome. We'll share the links to that and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com/235. Scott, you're always doing something new, something exciting in the hobby. Always great to catch up with you. Have fun, and can't wait to see what you come up with in O-scale.
Thanks, Ray. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.